Lloyd Doggett is still in his home district this morning, and he joins me now live. Congressman, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Now, you called for congressional approval on any military action even before the president's announcement this weekend. Why do you think that was the right decision?
Well, I did. Almost 200 members of Congress joined in asking the president to come to Congress. I don't believe that we should be engaged in military action unless there's a commitment by the people's representatives.
So would you support a limited scope resolution, one that was very specific about its intentions and limits?
Well, I certainly wouldn't support an open-ended one, but I think it's important until we hear all the evidence not to make a final decision. At this point, I lean against this. I think the real question is, will American families be safer once this is done? Will we bear all the costs, both in terms of our military and in terms of our taxpayers? How is it that we benefit from leaving in power someone who's been involved in a civil war where 100,000 people have died? We shoot a few cruise missiles at him, and he's still there. How do we come out ahead in that situation?
So would you be seeking stronger measures, ones that would seek to essentially shift the balance on the battlefield and overturn Assad's regime?
I think what I would like to see is a plan and some indication of what would be a way of determining if we've been successful. If this is about sending him a message, there are other ways to send a message about the horrors of the criminality in which he appears to have been involved.
And you mentioned those horrors. You know, we've all seen those terrible images coming out, rows of children affected by the violence there. Do you think that there's a need to act on humanitarian grounds, whether or not it's in our self-interest, but just a moral obligation?
Well, I supported the president in Libya, where we work with allies and where I felt action was required because a humanitarian disaster was about to occur. Here, the horror has already taken place. It's clear the president doesn't have a sense of great urgency, or we'd already be back in Washington debating this matter, as I think we should be.
But with all due respect, sir, with all due respect, you say that the horrors have already taken place, but does that mean that you believe that there will not be more that are coming in the future?
Well, as I understand it, we will not be seeking regime change. We will be leaving him in power. We will be saying, or he will be able to say, as he has mocked us already, that he took a hit from the United States and is still standing. I don't see how that is a plan for success and greater safety for our families. And there are reasons not to become overly involved in this civil war. At an earlier time, it may have been that we could have prevented some of this with action, with encouraging our allies to arm the rebels before they became so involved with Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. At this point, I don't see how a plan that is sending him a message, that is leaving him standing, serves the interest of the American people. And this is, as General Zinni has said, not a one-act play. We may find some response, and if Americans lose lives, a wider war here. So I want to get a better understanding of what is the plan, what are the what-ifs, what do we do next, not just the first round of missiles. And certainly after the experience of the 2001 resolution and the resolution on Iraq, any resolution must be narrowly tailored and limited in time to justify support.
And Congressman, if I may ask you quickly, what's your sense of how your colleagues in the House are going to vote on this in the end?
It's really difficult to say. We're scattered across the country. Very few of our colleagues were able to participate directly in the short notice for hearings in Washington. I will say I know in terms of my constituents to this point, they have been overwhelmingly against the idea of another go-it-alone involvement in a civil war in the Middle East.
All right, Congressman Lloyd Doggett of Texas.
Thanks.
The moral and humanitarian case has been made. The bigger argument, without question, and I thought Representative Doggett from Texas was absolutely brilliant, is if you take limited military action, you end up achieving your political purpose. And I think the answer is no.
Kathleen, to touch upon that a little bit more, what do you think the most compelling rationale for an attack is? Is it protecting U.S. allies? Is it punitive against Assad's regime? Is it humanitarian and moral? What is the convincing case here?
Probably the most convincing case. First, I agree with General McCaffrey. I think the evidence that the Assad regime conducted these attacks is there. And even the Syrians and the Russians are agreeing a chemical attack occurred, which is a vastly different situation than we've faced in the past, for instance, with Iraq. But I think the best case that the United States can make is to deter future use of chemical weapons, to hold to the norm and to the red line that the President has set out, that chemical weapon use at this scale against civilians is unacceptable. And that is a form of a self-defense argument that the United States is going to have to make. It is a tough argument, let me make that clear, without UN backing, which we are not going to get, and without strong coalition support, which I think the President and his team will be spending the next week or so trying to build, just as they're building a case here with the Congress.
General, I'd like to ask you a military strategy question. The President has said that this issue is not time sensitive, but is that really true? Does this delay in a possible strike give Assad any advantages in preparing for an attack?
Oh, yeah, without question. And the most important one of which is psychological, and to further weaken the potential for President Obama to put together a coalition, never mind dispersing his military forces, moving helicopters and rocket artillery units into populated areas. You know, but at the end of the day, all these questions disappear to end up with one. If you want to use military force, will Assad believe that we're willing to go the route, yes or no? If you communicate clearly that we're just signaling to you you're not at risk, then military options are really ineffectual and probably worsen the situation.
And Kathleen, even if we do move forward and act, do you think that a military response would deter future chemical weapons use on the part of the Syrian government?
I do think so. First, I think the Syrians are probably deterred at this point. I think that's a fair statement. But I think the U.S. following through on its commitments first will have a huge morale boost to the opposition. And the opposition is not as one unit, but there are very positive elements in the moderate opposition that would be buoyed by a U.S. response. And I think it sends a very strong signal to Iran in particular that when we set a red line, we will follow through on the red line.
And General, you know, Kathleen mentions the opposition, and the opposition is extremely fractured. It's not a monolithic body. So is that part of the calculation here, is that even in the event that the Assad regime were to be removed, we don't know who's going to step in to fill that power vacuum?
No, we have a pretty good idea. Richard Engel's been reporting some 60% of the opposition are extremist jihadist organizations. And let me tell you, I totally supported President Obama going to Congress. He was so far out on a limb, it was pathetic. If we had no backing from the United Nations, NATO, the Arab League for a military strike, Egypt and Jordan had specifically opposed it, and Saudi Arabia isn't claiming they're going to take part in it. So going to Congress and saying, you better step up to the plate here and support me if we're going to take military action is the right thing to do. But Representative Doggett made the argument, American people don't support this operation, and a limited military strike probably will not achieve our political purpose.